Welcome to The Explainer. I'm really thrilled you're joining me today because we are about to take a profound, honestly kind of poetic journey into the very heart of what learning truly means. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating source text titled Musings, Education for All. Now, this is not your typical dry academic paper. Instead, it's this beautifully structured, reflective piece that challenges us to look way beyond just accumulating facts and figures. So let's jump right into this framework and see how breaking it down helps us truly understand the message. What is education? It's such a simple question on the surface, isn't it? But it's actually the central philosophical anchor of our source material today. The author repeats this exact question over and over, using it as this rhythmic drumbeat to challenge our standard definition of knowledge. This isn't just about passing tests. It's a deep dive into whether what we call education is actually serving humanity, or if it's just an empty exercise.
Okay, Section 1. Meet the author, Oluyomi Oladevid. Before we unpack the complex themes of her text, we need to understand the mind behind these musings. Let's look at where her unique perspective originates.
What's absolutely crucial to realize here is how her background frames everything we're about to read. Oluyomi Oladevid describes herself as proudly Nigerian, with a deep love for people. And she isn't just a poet, she's deeply concerned with global development and real transformation. She enjoys generating concrete solutions and actually influencing policy. And crucially, her worldview is guided deeply by her faith. She notes that her Father God owns the universe and is the wheel within her wheels. So as we explore her work, remember that she is combining the pragmatic eye of a policy influencer with profound spiritual roots.
12. This is a vital number for our explainer today. In her text, she uniquely breaks down her philosophy into 12 distinct pillars or stanzas. In each of these 12 sections, she contrasts a core requirement of true education against what she terms vain knowledge, essentially knowledge that is empty, useless, or even destructive. Let's see exactly how she categorizes these concepts.
Section 2. The mind and heart, the internal self. We've gone ahead and organized her 12 pillars into overarching themes to make them easier to digest. This first grouping focuses squarely on how true education must shape our internal virtues before it does anything else.
Look at the poetic rhythm she establishes right from the start. What is education? Without enlightenment, vain is knowledge that darkens the mind. The key takeaway here is her foundational premise. If learning doesn't actually bring light, if it doesn't enlighten the learner, then that knowledge isn't just neutral. It's actively harmful. It darkens the mind. She's telling us point blank that information without clarity and understanding is entirely counterproductive.
Building on that, she presents a really brilliant contrast. She asks, what is education without conscience? If we just teach skills without moral grounding, she argues we are left with a vain perspective. And what does that perspective do? Well, it hardens the heart. She's making a direct, undeniable link here between an unguided intellect and a total lack of empathy.
And then she takes it a step further with virtue. Education without virtue results in vain lessons. If you aren't teaching what is good and right alongside the mathematics and the sciences, the lesson itself becomes empty. And according to her, it actually corrupts the mind. The absence of virtue isn't just a neutral state. For her, it is a state of active corruption.
This brings us to a massively powerful assertion. Education without thought results in a vain practice that enslaves the mind. Really think about that for a second. She's pushing back hard against rote memorization or blindly following instructions. If the educational practice doesn't require active, critical, independent thought, it becomes a chain. It enslaves rather than liberates.
Moving on to Section 3, the roots, culture, history, and ancestry. Once the internal self is established with virtue and thought, she connects the individual learner outward to the broader roots of humanity.
Here we see a beautifully nuanced perspective. She asks, what is education without culture? But notice the warning right after. Vain is tradition that clogs the wheel. She values culture immensely, sure, but she isn't blindly nostalgic. If a tradition hinders progress, if it clogs the wheel of the global development she cares so much about, then that tradition is vain. Education has to integrate culture, but it must be a living, breathing, progressive culture.
I absolutely love the imagery she uses here, the vain parrot. She writes that education without history creates a vain parrot. When we ignore historical context, when we just repeat facts without understanding the lineage of those facts, we are literally just mimicking. We aren't truly educated, we're just parrots ignoring the past. It's a stark, powerful warning against historical amnesia. Closely related to that is her emphasis on ancestry. Education without ancestry is a vain process that excludes the source. She's reminding us that no knowledge exists in a vacuum, right? Everything we learn builds upon what our ancestors discovered. An educational system that strips away origins is just an empty, disconnected process.
Section 4. External connections, principles, purpose, and faith. Let's move to our final set of pillars. We've looked at the internal mind, we've looked backward at our roots, and now we examine how her view of education interacts with the external world and with higher principles.
This is such a fascinating outward-looking idea. Education without audience, vain is stage that omits the crowd. I mean, what is the point of a platform, or a degree, or deep knowledge if there's literally no one there to receive it or benefit from it? She views education as an inherently social act. A stage without a crowd is useless, and knowledge that isn't shared to help an audience is just vain.
Next, she takes a strong philosophical stance on ethics. Education without principle relies on vain means, and those means, she argues, ultimately negate the end. This is basically her way of saying the ends do not justify the means. If you achieve your educational goals through unprincipled ways, you destroy the very value of the goal you were trying to reach in the first place.
Now this is where she brilliantly combines the intensely practical with the psychological. First, she says education without wealth makes tutelage a vain thing that impoverishes the rich. Learning requires real resources and investment to be effective. But right alongside that, she says education needs a boundary. Otherwise, nurture deifies the mind, meaning we need limits, humility, and structure. Otherwise, we risk becoming arrogant, thinking of ourselves as gods simply because we are educated. It's a call for grounded, well-resourced yet humble learning.
And here we return to that core part of her identity we established earlier. What is education without faith? Vain is subject that weakens the strong. For her, faith is the ultimate stabilizing force. Without it, even the strongest mind can be weakened by the subjects they study. It's a deeply personal stanza that ties her entire 12-pillar framework straight back to her reliance on her Father God.
Finally, Section 5. The ultimate goal, wholesome education for all. So we've got all these beautiful, abstract concepts. But remember, Oluyomi Ola-David is a policy influencer who cares deeply about global development. How does she ground this poetry in reality? Let's look at her ultimate goals.
At the very end of her source text, she actually tags her musings with these specific real-world targets. She isn't just writing poetry for poetry's sake, she is advocating for inclusive growth. She connects true education to mental health, specifically calling out the UN Sustainable Development Goal 3. She calls out SDG 4, which is quality education. She's explicitly bridging her philosophical musings to the pragmatic, urgent goal of sustainable, inclusive education for absolutely everyone.
And this all culminates in a term she highlights, wholesome education. Based on our deep dive into our work today, we can define this as a completely holistic approach to learning. It's an education that flat out refuses to be just about data. It actively integrates a clear conscience, a respect for culture, and strong ethical principles, all working together to foster sustainable development and inclusive growth. That is the incredible framework she is offering to educators and policymakers alike.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive challenge, doesn't it? After exploring her 12 pillars, we kind of have to look in the mirror and ask, are we merely gaining vain knowledge, darkening our minds and hardening our hearts? Or are we actively participating in and demanding a wholesome, truly enlightened education for all? It's a question that completely redefines what it means to be a lifelong learner. I hope this explainer helped clarify this beautiful perspective for you today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep asking the big questions.